Let me listen. Television, the stage is yours. The initial provocation is about this conflict between the United States and Canada because it also has a very similar dynamic. I was trying to figure out who Daniel Perez is. I'm going to put this challenge to you. The next provocation for you is about what they're trying to do across the whole hemisphere, not just in Canada. They're also doing this to Brazil.
Right?
What?
What they're doing with the hemisphere, that's the point, right? There are no limits, right? That's the issue. Because if we don't look at this, we don't understand how deep the hole goes, right? Actually, there's a concept within one wing of American thinking, and Marco Rubio is just the beginning of it. I heard you talking about Daniel Perez, right? Yeah, he's just the beginning of it, of looking at Latin America, looking at all of the Americas, North, Central, and South, and saying this is our territory. They interpret the Monroe Doctrine, which isn't worth trying to explain now. The Monroe Doctrine is another topic. In 1823, it was America for the Americans. It was like this. England and Spain, take your claws out of here. It was a different story, wasn't it? The United States didn't have any power to take control of the Americas in 1823, right? So they could barely hold themselves up. England wasn't going to take it back. That's another story, right? So when we look at this, right, of course, the United States is seeing this in that context. In the Canadian case, I have a feeling that the Canadian case, right, it's a very well-crafted provocation, right? And once again, a deep message to all the allies. If we do this with Canada, we'll do it with anyone. That's it. Of course, it has to do with America, but it's also a message to the whole world. Because, again, the Iran episode is repeating itself. We need to remember that, right? In Iran, when the war started, I'll never forget, February 28th. On February 26th, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff were with the Iranian negotiators, and they received a proposal from the negotiators, an absolutely interesting proposal from the Iranians. The Iranian negotiators, to begin with, said, look, we're going to accept the IAEA. We're going to accept IAEA monitoring. 2 days later, they are bombed by Israel. More or less, allowing for the differences, Iran is not Canada, but the same thing happened. They were in an active commercial negotiation with the people from the Department of Commerce when it happened. A bomb fell on them. Which, by the way, the Canadian diplomacy, in order not to make things worse, even worse, Canadian diplomacy has remained silent. He doesn't say what the United States demanded. What Canada says on Friday night when Michael Carney shouted and said, we are out. What did they demand? Because they had been negotiating for over a month. What happened with this demand? If we don't look at this, we won't understand the crisis, right? So even the New York Times published this today, right? That Canada, the United States was demanding a cultural change from Canada, that it stop using French language labels. Well, the government's reaction, of course, this has a brutal impact in Canada, but this could be negotiated. This wasn't something that warranted such an outcry from Canada, right? For such a situation. Because look, we need to see what we're actually talking about. There's no point trying to hide the obvious. The American economy needs the Canadian economy much less than the Canadian economy needs the American one. Let's make that very clear, right? So for us to look at this situation, right, you have to ask the question, why did they do it in Korea? Why did they do it now, right? And there's a more serious question about all of this, which we have to have enough humility to recognize. What is it that we don't know for a situation to get this big, right? Maybe we don't know, right? How scared, worried, or to use a worse word, desperate is the United States that it would resort to this kind of action? Because it was an emergency. The list of tariff products doesn't make sense. It doesn't have economic logic. You understand? Of course, the key point of the story, he didn't touch. Oil, gas, potash, and the minerals that Canada sells. He didn't touch that because that would be strangling. That's very serious. Other than that, why did he do it, right? So my feeling is that we are facing a deep crisis in the American government and we don't know the extent of it. That's why he's going after South Korea, after Japan, saying the things he's saying to Iran. Telling Iran that they are going to be sanctioned sounds like a joke, doesn't it? They are, as my great aunt would say, old hands at this, right? They've been sanctioned for 50 years. Since the Ayatollah's revolution, since Khomeini, right? They're sanctioned since 2015. The only one who comes from, the other day, once I did a report about broken glass caused by the Israeli Air Force during that 12-day war. Mr. Ottavio did a story that I will never forget. Who was replacing the glass in Tehran that was shattered by the bombings from China, man? No one sells glass to Iran. The article was fantastic. I remember it perfectly because the article showed how much normal life in Tehran depended on China. We don't know, but there's no point in trying to impose a maritime blockade on China. China brings products through Pakistan, inside Pakistan, all the way to Iran by railway, right? By land. Zelensky went there to do a little job to see if he could please Trump, dropped a bomb on that railway. The Chinese told him something and he stopped. He didn't do it a second time. What the Chinese told him, I don't know, and neither do you. Now, what he did, just like my little dog, he tucked his tail, behaved himself. So, of course, we're dealing with a situation that's becoming very serious because what we always have to maintain is the lack of control. In this context, I repeat an analysis that always catches my attention. Cesar thinks this through with me. He corrects me. The ones who are keeping their heads on straight in the United States are the military.
Speaking of this, let me put on the screen. This is a page I like, okay, on Instagram. I think it has serious analysis. I don't know who runs this page. It's called Geopolítica Hoje. I'm going to read it to you and you tell me what you think, okay?
What we think about it. Let's go.
That's it. Just because Geopolítica Hoje posted this 6 hours ago. The largest rare earth mine in Brazil is about to be handed over to the United States government. And what's worse, at a price that doesn't even represent a significant fraction, the strategic weight of these resources. And then he pointed out here, mentioning this region of Amazonas, right? Goiás, here, Bahia, Minas Gerais, and so on. And it says in the text, I'll read it, it's 5 slides, and then I'll let you give your assessment, Professor. The United States is moving forward with the purchase of a rare earth mine in Brazil, with the Trump administration injecting public money into the operation. The Pentagon announced $750 million to ensure control over Serra Verde in Goiás, aiming to secure control over strategic minerals for its war machine. That's exactly what you're working on. That's why I remembered that publication. Under the justification of, quote, resilient supplies, the United States Army wants to export critical minerals from Brazil to manufacture next-generation weapons. In practice, it's the subordination of our natural resources to the interests of US military hegemony. By securing exclusive access to vital elements like dysprosium and neodymium, the United States uses Brazilian soil in its trade war against China. Brazil provides the raw materials and deals with the impact, while Washington concentrates the technology and the profits. The package totals $1.5 billion, combined with a previous loan of $565 million from the DFC agency. It's an aggressive move of foreign state capital to monopolize extraction in the project by EMA and dictate mineral exploration in the heart of Brazil. And then finally, United States authorities celebrate that Brazilian minerals will protect their fighter jets, nuclear submarines, and infrastructure. Once again, the wealth of the global south is appropriated to directly subsidize the technological sovereignty and military expansionism of the North. So, Trevisan, everyone keeps waiting for the United States to invade with an army and have military troops, but from what it seems, that's not even necessary, right? We're seeing a clear demonstration of that, aren't we?
First of all, there's no doubt, right? There's no doubt that Brazil is all in, right? Today I happened to see an article, it was in Estadão, right? That President Lula shook hands with General Mourão. And the reason they shook hands is because General Mourão was assuring President Lula that he would give him his vote to protect Brazil's critical minerals. That was the subject. The Brazilian Congress, once again, is, let's put it this way, right asleep at the wheel. You remember that old expression? Reality is happening. Or they're doing this on purpose, right? That's not a good source. I don't need to say anything else. Right? Because this news adds to two others in Minas Gerais, where American interests bought stakes in mines from rare earth mines. I remember perfectly. I'm quoting from memory. I always think that's risky, but I should add that I'm going from memory. I'm sure about that. There are two others in Minas Gerais, another one in Goiás, and now this one that you are telling me about. It's not an isolated case. Pay attention. The United States is buying up stakes because China has already bought others. And even the European Union publicly sent a mission here to Brazil. If my memory serves me right, it was a month and a half ago, not quite 2 months. Exactly, to participate in, quote, rare earth auctions. And Congress is fast asleep, to quote the anthem. Because we don't have specific legislation about this. So, what has really caught my attention, Cesar, is that certain topics that are, this one is absolutely irrelevant, are very far from the political debate when we have an election in how long? A month, a little over a month, right? So this is a topic that the candidates should be questioned about. What are you going to do about rare earths? All the candidates, without any exception, because this debate we've already talked about. This debate comes along with a much more serious debate that never even enters our election debates. Look, Cesar, you have no idea how right you are, in my humble opinion, to bring up this subject, Cesar. Because this debate goes hand in hand with another debate we aren't having, which is national defense. The whole world is debating national defense. The world has changed, man. Jair, Japan is adopting a different national defense policy. Japan is peaceful, or at least it was. The Koreas and all of Asia, the Arabs. We think that national defense is a matter for academics and the military. No, 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 no. National defense has to be everyone's business. It has to be a political issue, an obvious issue. Because when we talk about national defense, it's really about defense, my friend. That's exactly what you just said. Today, you no longer need to have troops invading Santos or invading Recife. No, 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 that's not the problem. That doesn't exist anymore. Is that so? When you look at this and say, look, democracy is no longer threatened by a military coup. The future of countries is no longer threatened by any invasion of this kind. The future of countries depends on the choices they make and how they will be able to defend themselves. This is also a topic that Brazilian progressive thinking tends to overlook. You can't, man. You can't. This is a topic that obviously needs to be on the agenda. Look at the news you just reported. Look at the news that just made me remember two other auctions like this. Rare earths, I think any kid, any little boy with a cell phone in his hand, he talks about it. He knows what rare earths are. Rare earths, maybe they don't know about the magnetization that brings them together, but it has to do with the existence of cell phones. It has to do with the existence of electric cars. It has to do with the existence of drones. It has to do with the existence of fighter jets. It has to do with everything you think of in everyday life. It has to do with the data center that generates energy for you to think and exist. So when wow, if we are the second largest reserve of rare earths in the world, the first is another very complicated place. It's Ukraine. If we are the second largest reserve of rare earths, I once read an article in Foreign Affairs, right, some years ago, that the main reason why the war in Ukraine doesn't end is because Russia and the United States can't agree on who gets the Ukrainian rare earths. How so? While this is happening, they just leave the old folks like Elenkes there. You understand? So it's because, in fact, look at the risk. If something like this is happening with Ukraine, just think a little about whether we shouldn't be discussing national defense.
Of course.